a little bit of grease on both of those before you start. Definitely not something you have to do. I just find it easier than putting it in dry. That's never fun.
From Mooresville, Indiana, he drives the Daystar Directional Drilling, Edco General Contractors, Collision Concepts, BooyahDarts.com 35. It's Zach Hampton.
All right, so we're going to start on the front end now. So I've got my bolts in the frame here where our radius rods are going to go on. We haven't greased them yet. They're just there so that I know where they're at. I'm going to show you guys a few things. I've got everything on the bench kind of laid out that we're going to need. And then again, because this isn't a brand new axle or car or parts, there's a few things I'm going to show you guys first that are really important. So as you can see here, we've got our axle beam laid up here. I didn't take the studs out. Don't feel like that's something I need to really go over. You can run studs a lot, like you can also just run a bolt through. Like I said, it's easier with a stud, getting the shock on and off. So these are from Stevie Smith as well. This gap here, how big that is what you need so that your shock doesn't get into the axle at any point. So really good. They're made for this. So we've got our drag link here, which will be kind of last, tie rod. We've got a few tools out, some greases and Loctite we'll need. We've got our kingpins and some hub nuts, brake mount. These will hold the brake onto the rotor, onto the hub. So we've got our hubs. I'm only going to, because this axle was built and I took it apart, I went ahead and cleaned one of our bearings, and I'm going to show you how to pack that, but there's no need to show you all four. So I didn't want to have to take them all apart and clean them when they've already been done, back at after the year was over. So we've got our seals here. So really you're going to pack your bearings and put your seal or your bearing in the back, and then you'll just push this seal in. So you can either find something that's kind of a in-between circumference of where it's not going to hit the hub, but it's around this. They make some. You can buy them. I'm not sure who makes them, but they're super helpful with putting those in, and you just get it flush. And you can put a bead of silicone here if you want to. Like if you're going to run oil and not grease, I would definitely silicone that. Otherwise, you don't really need to. So yeah, and then you'll grease down in this pocket. You want to make sure you have plenty of grease in here. So that's just kind of some extra. It's all going to work itself around. And then like this, you'll pack your outer bearing, put it on, and then you'll see how we slide those onto our spindles. So we got our steering arms, brake rotor, brake caliper, and then some tether stuff in the back. So here's our blocks. We're going to be 4 and 5. I'll show you why. But that's what you're going to do in the front. Really, it's 5s, right? Because we have the raised rail, like I explained with the rear. So those are both technically a 5-inch block. So the first thing I'm going to do is put radius rods on. You can build your front axles in a vise or on a bench. I'm sure even some people who make them and sell them that are things that hold your axle like on the bench while you do it. I think it's easier to just build it in the car. But yeah, the other few, I guess 2 things I kind of wanted to show you guys that are important, or especially if you get your axle powder coated, right? This is going to need re-reamed out. So I've got mine in the mule. I've kind of got 2 different tools I use. So you don't want to get too aggressive, but this is a kingpin reamer. If you get one, you'll notice this doesn't fit on a drill. There's a reason for that. Don't put this on a drill. You don't want to get that aggressive with it. So for me, a 13/16 12-point socket fits on there. So I use that with the ratchet wrench. And like I said, you don't want to get too crazy aggressive with that thing, but you want to get the bulk of it with that and go slow. Make sure you stay straight. And then the second item that I use, right, is one of these. And I'm not sure what it's called. Rob Hart turned me on to them, but that is the perfect size. And this is going to clean it up and smooth it out a little bit more from once you're done with the kingpin reamer. So you don't want to get aggressive. You want your kingpins to be able to slide in, but you don't want them to be sloppy. Some guys like it where they have to beat the kingpin in. So I'm not one of those guys, but some people are. So we've got our panhard bar here, right, labeled. It goes to, the gray car, which is this is a primary, so I know what that means. Now, your directional thing, it's not going to matter here on which way, because nothing's ever going to hit this and spin it the wrong way. So really the important thing is just do it the same all the time. That way when you go to adjust it, you already know which way to turn your high end. So as you can see on a Maxim here, you've got 2 sets of holes you can go in. Standard is going to be the top hole. I've never, as you can see, the powder coat's super fresh, never been in the bottom hole. I'm sure there's a time to be or a reason to be and why they have those options, but for me, I'm in the standard hole, and I don't know what the second hole would be used for. I mean, obviously for the panhard bar, but I don't know the purpose that serves. So standard hole in the top here. Gonna tighten our bolt. So for the people watching that maybe have no information at all on how stuff works, what that panhard bar is going to do is hold the axle in place as far as the side to side, right? You don't want that flopping around back and forth. So that's the purpose it serves. Our left front, you're going to have a steel radius rod with steel heims. That's mandatory for safety reasons. Your right side is going to be aluminum. So like we had said already, I've got my left hand nut here. That's going to go on the left side inwards of the car. And that's because of the way the tire rotates. If a tire were to hit this, like my tire were to hit this, which it normally can't, but if something else maybe broke and I'm kind of limping to the end of the race, something could, and it goes to spin this radius rod, it can't undo the nuts. It'll actually tighten them and not loosen them. That is why that's so important. You don't want a tire to be rubbing on something and on one of your heims, front or rear, and spin the thing off, because that's going to allow this axle to shoot forward or shoot back, and it's just going to instantly turn your car. So that's why the directions are important on those. I'll leave that loose for now since it's not going to be locked in place. So tighten it to the frame, right? And now, heads up, Ollie. Sorry, bub. We've got our right fronts. You've got a top and a bottom. I've got RFB and RFT here. So these are going to face outwards. Our left-hand heims are going to face out on the right side of the car. All right, there we go. Now, the main reason we have 2 radius rods on the right side versus 1 on the left is you're holding this axle front to back, but with the 2 on the right, we'll get to it once we're more built, but you're going to set your caster, how much the axle is rolled back, forward, etc. And that is definitely something that everyone has their own numbers for, what they do, etc. I'm at 12. I think that's pretty normal. I would say probably everyone's in the window of like 10 to 14, but I'm sure there's some outliers. It depends. You can get your axles built different. You can get all sorts of crazy with that stuff. But if you ordered a standard axle from Maxim, that's where you're going to be. Your camber, honestly, I'd be lying if I said I knew exactly what it was standard, but I want to say it's like 8 and 10. And that's just your normal. So now that the right sides are on and locking them, got this from spinning front to back, we can tighten this bolt down. So one thing I kind of want to show you guys, as you can see, the head of these bolts and the head where they go through the frame, are the same as the nut on the panhard bar, which is the same on here. So this is all reduced head stuff. that I'm running, which I would say is the most normal. It's going to mean you need a 9/16 wrench or a socket. The other size would be 3/4 if you're using just a standard bolt. Just make sure like your nuts and bolts, everything kind of matches up. So like if your bolts are 3/4 head, you should use a normal nut like on your shocks and a normal nut here, and that way you only need one wrench or one socket to change a front axle. The other thing that's an option on axles, pretty much anywhere, you can see the nut here is welded on. If you're changing axles in a hurry or you want to get out of the work area, that's, I feel like, mandatory. You've got to have those welded on. It just makes your life so much easier. You're not having guys lose them by dropping them in a hurry, etc. And just makes your life easier in general. So those are a few things kind of to note. So now that we've got that in, we're going to set it up on our blocks here. So because we know that we're going to be in the top hole, right, on this panhard bar, I'll show you why I know that I need a 5 and 4-inch block. So, well, it would help if I put them on the right sides. Right, so as you guys can mostly see here, maybe if I lower that, it's going to blend in, but the panhard is perfectly level. So that's how I know those blocks. So if you know what hole you're going to be in, you want to make your blocks. If you go in the bottom hole, you're going to lower your blocks probably an inch. It looks like those are different. So that's the main thing, is your panhard bar is level when you're squaring, or not, yeah, squaring your car. So that's going to help raise this up some, and we can do, everything from here. The next step is going to be to start getting the spindles on. So these spindles are not directional, or like there's not a left front and a right front, whatever. They're all the same. I keep track of what side mine are on, and they always go on that side. It's not mandatory. Like I said, it's not a directional thing. They're all the same. Left fronts and right fronts are the exact same. So it really doesn't matter which side you put it on. We'll start on the right front because that's the one that I didn't take the other bearing out. So on all your kingpins, when you put the spindles on, you're going to have a roller bearing, and then you're going to have like some fatter ones and some thinner ones. So for me personally, you're definitely going to have your roller bearings and 2 fat ones. And then every axle and kingpin, whatever, it's going to be a little bit different. So I already know because I've had these on and I kept these separated when I cleaned them, but I've got 3 thin ones here. So I would say just have the thin ones with you, and you're going to kind of push those in until you're at a happy place. I'll show you where I get mine to. But you definitely want your fat ones around the roller bearing one, just because I've had where I put a thin one there and it ends up kind of like squishing weird. So just put your fat ones around that. And then we'll come over here. All right, so I'm going to hang these here for a moment. So one thing I like to do when I go to grease these, I grease my kingpin itself. You really don't need much. It's going to just swish all away, but I like to put some on it first. And then have a paper towel handy. You can use gloves if you want. So then I just like to go ahead and put that in, and as you can see, the grease is kind of already getting pushed off it, but I like to get at least a little bit of a layer of grease on this before we go, and then I'll wipe that off, put it back on here. Try to not get grease on everything. And then I do the same thing with the spindle itself. Maybe. Try to get it lined up. There we go. So push that in there, and you're just getting a little bit of grease on both of those before you start. Definitely not something you have to do. I just find it easier than putting it in dry. That's never fun. So these ears are going to be at the top, and you're going to line this up, right? Try to get that started again. Get it lined up. Wipe some of that excess off. And then just going to get it started, push this on, and you're going to push this in. You can go till it goes through here, and then you're going to back off. We're going to grab our washers here, which, like I said, I'll kind of just do it this way so I can show you guys. You've got your 3 main ones. Actually, one thing we're going to do, we're going to grease this a bit. Honestly, don't know if you have to, need to, anything like that. You know, like a bunch of dirt's going to get in this little crevice and whatnot. And so I just like to make a good habit. It's definitely not going to hurt. I just don't really know if it's something everyone does or not. So just kind of work them in there. And then we're going to put our 2 fat washers on both sides. This is where it can get a little bit tricky trying to line them up. So as you can see, it pushed all the way in there. So there's a ton of up and down wiggle there, which I do want some, but I don't want to not, or I don't want to have none. I don't want it so tight this thing can't spin. So we're going to pull our kingpin back up. I'm going to try to get these kind of started under. Now, normally I'd go one at a time, but like I said, I already know that this is the amount I want. Maybe I got my sides mixed up. I maybe could get a third one on there, but there's only, just a tick of up and down movement there, but this is really free, so that's what we're looking for. So now that we've got that on, we're going to grab our stud that goes on the bottom. You are always going to have, at least for a wing car, where the kingpin to kingpin tether is mandatory, even I'm sure some non-wing stuff. You're going to have something similar to this, right? You've got this nut here, this shoulder on the bottom, a nut, and this is going to go into here. And that's where our tether is going to go onto. So normally, as you can see, there's some grease on there. I already had some grease on there, but you're going to want to spin some grease on. For mine, these are a 7/8. I'd say that's pretty normal. And Stevie's are really nice, where it's actually a full hex. A lot look like the top of your kingpin here. And honestly, they're kind of a pain in the butt. So another really nice saying that Stevie makes. But we are going to tighten this up. So my kingpins are steel. You can get tie ones. They're about, if a steel kingpin's 15 or 20 bucks, probably 20. A tie one's, 80 or 100. So not any huge benefit. Really, they can end up getting kind of wear marks and be a pain to get out. So I just prefer the steel. I don't need the weight or the weight savings. I need the weight. So that's why I'm on steel. Hubs are directional. So as you can see, this is my right front. There's no ears. As you can see, the ears on the left front. Because you're right front, you're not going to have a brake, meaning no rotor. You don't need those ears. The next part that's going to go on is our steering arm. So that's going to be 2 bolts. And again, reduced heads. The important thing, I'll put one of these in to hold it for a second, is I'm going to grease it. Some guys will Loctite or blue Loctite, and that's perfectly fine. We're going to torque these no matter what. So I prefer grease. Loctite, if you use Loctite, you're going to end up having to heat this up with a torch when you go to take them out. So I'm just more of a grease guy myself, but you can do it with whatever makes you comfortable. So put a little bit on the shoulder there. I just don't want anything to grab that could give me like a false reading on my torque wrench. So don't need a crazy amount there. As you can see, just a little bit. We'll get that one started. Then we can take this one out. We've got our torque wrench. Put our socket on there. And we left off on inch pounds. So we're going to go ahead and change that back to foot pounds. And it's at 16. I like these at 45. I think you could get away with less. But I like bolts not falling off, and just 45 has always worked for me. So that's what we're going to go with. So the only downside to doing it in the car like this is there's going to be times where it wants to pull the axle up. So you might just have to get some leverage and hold it from trying to spin or pull up off that block. All right, so 45.6 is where that ended. And the next thing, as you can maybe see those little holes and whatnot, I'm actually going to tie wire these as a safety, which is why I don't use Loctite and I use grease, is I'm going to end up tie wiring it. Anyways, if you Loctite it, there's no need to tie wire these. I just think it's easier to get the tie wire off, right? So let's see. It's kind of worn off. I can't remember. I want to say this is like 040 stainless steel. So as you can see, it's kind of, it says 104 millimeters. So I'm not sure what that is in real terms. And, you know, like, I think it's 040 as far as like inches go on Imperial. But you can probably see there kind of the code or whatever. So this is what I use. I have a decent idea. I'm just going to cut off a little bit more than I know I'm going to need. And then I'm going to lightly fold this in half. I don't want to kink it, right? But I want to give myself a good idea of what half is. And we're going to go from this side. Whatever direction is going to pull the bolt. It's not going to move the bolt, right? But it would be pulling in the direction of tightening the bolt. Either way, if this bolt came a little bit loose because of the tie wire, it's not going to fall off. But technically, you want to go in the direction that's going to tighten it, right? So now these are going to pull over, and that's going to tighten it. So I'm going to get a good idea here of just before the bolt. So, you know, about right there. And then if you don't have a pair of these, super nice. I'm going to kind of lock on there, lock it into place. And now I can just pull, you know, this, and it's going to twist my tie wire for me. Oh, one of them popped out. These are really old. I really need to get a new pair because they often unlock and kind of pop off or whatever. There we go. So, right, not too crazy of a kink or, you know, a wind. And then, right, we're going to be just perfect there. So we're going to feed, get one started. You'll have to get them both started and then kind of work them together to get to where you're tight. But we'll get that one started. Oop. About that much wind, and that's going to give me enough that there's not going to be too much and I might even cut it shorter, but it's going to allow me to push this out of the way and kind of lock it up into a place that I'm not going to find myself reaching somewhere and stab myself. So we can unlock, and I usually push mine just down and kind of into this little crevice here. So it looks like that's going to be just about right. Cut just a couple little winds off, and then we're going to push that back like so. So now these bolts can't come free. They can only spin, just a tick before the tie wire itself is going to stop them. And that's a lot easier than heating these up to get the Loctite off. So now we can go back to this part. So kind of hold that front one in place, push it in as far as you can. Now, the next step are these two pieces here, right? So this is actually threaded, and that's going to thread on. This is not, but you can see this little tab here, and then on the top, you can see that. So that's going to go in that little groove, and then you're going to spin this nut on. And I'm not positive that that's where these are going to line up right now, but they're there so that I don't lose them. So I'm going to go finger tight, and then I'm going to grab my T-handle, take these back out momentarily. Make sure I don't lose them. Now you can use channel locks for this next part, but it's not as easy. DMI makes this tool. That's who made my spindles. That's who made my hubs. Obviously that's your little locking nut here is going to come from them. So this pops on there, and you'll see what the other side's for in a minute. But I'm going to go pretty tight, right? And then you're actually going to look into these holes and find where you line up. Now, for me, I'd either have to go way tighter or back off just a little bit. And I would rather back off just a bit. And I'm just going to back off until my holes in my little, my nut here line up with that first little piece we put on. So it's looking right there. And we're going to be in this top and bottom hole. So you're going to grab your little Allen, I believe they're 1032s. And you're going to put them through here. Back that up a little bit. So what this is doing, why that inner ring kind of has the ear on it, and then these have this, is these bolts are going to go all the way through this front part into that inner ring. And it's going to lock this nut in from being able to spin, because the inner ring keeps it from spinning with that tab ear, and then your nuts here on this outside part are locking into that inner ring. So this is a safety measure to make sure that these never come off and you don't lose a hub, at least because of the nut coming off. So you could still lose a front wheel and hub, as people have seen, but that's usually with a brake, right? These don't come off unless you don't put your little safety bolts in there. So the next step is our kind of cover, I guess. So you see it screws in as well. Normally it says DMI here. It makes me mad with my OCD that the DMI logo never lines up. So I actually milled the top off just so that it's silver. It's not anything against DMI. I just am OCD because these all spin on a little bit different. So that's going to spin on like so. And then with your same wrench, not all manufacturers are like this. DMI does this style of hub or cap, and not all of them do. So like I've had some Weld or Winners hubs, and they're a little bit more of a pain to get on. Actually, I think Weld has this little style, but I don't remember whose I worked on that didn't. So nothing against weld. So there we go. So we've got our spindle, our steering arm, kingpins, everything is in, everything's locked down. It's not going to go anywhere. Because this is fresh grease and really tight, this isn't going to free spin a lot right now. But the reason you want to go tight, especially if you've just built one, just re-grease the bearings, all that, it's after probably one night, I'll be able to just, do this, and it'll probably spin 5 to 10 rotations. So you don't want this wobbly, but you're going to want it to be free. If after a night or two this hasn't freed up much, I might back that adjusting nut off once, because you don't want drag on that. And there's a few more steps in the left front, because we've got to put a rotor on the hub, and you got to do that before you put it onto the spindle. So I'm going to leave my grease there. Tie wire you won't be able to use on the left front. You'll see why with the bolts. So we're going to put that up. Here's our rotor, right? So we've got 3 holes. And the reason you have to do this part first is because the bolts come through the back here, and if you put it on your hub, your steering arm is in the way, right? You can't get to these. So how we're going to do it, how I prefer to do it, is we're going to carry our bolts, our hub, and our rotor over to the vise. All right, I'm going to set those down because we're going to need a few more things. These are Allen. I will tell you exactly what size. They're 7/32 Allen. We grabbed our torque wrench, some blue Loctite, our Allen, right, 7/32, and our ratchet. So, remember, I want to say this is bigger. Yeah, so usually what I do is I'll set this on the bench, and on here we're going to use a little bit of blue. And you'll see why I get these started here on the bench first. You can use red Loctite here as well if you want. I would say sometimes I do. And just with red Loctite, you are almost guaranteed to have to heat the thing up to kind of melt the Loctite before you can take it off. And I'm just not a big fan of having to do all that, especially if I'm in a hurry. So we're just going to get these to where they're hand tight. And then the reason I do that is your rotor is actually a little bit bigger around than your hub. So to put this into the vise, I'm going to hold it with the rotor. Crank it down, make sure this thing can't spin, and then we'll get it snug with our normal ratchet. We're going to go 45 on these as well. Maybe. I don't want to strip this nut. It looks like it only wanted to go about 39.4. So do not strip these. You'll never get them back out. Yeah, I'm going to go 40. That's just what it seems like it wants before it's going to maybe strip. So there, our rotor is on. Right, so we're going to go ahead and pack this bearing. Even though the spindle's not on, let's go ahead and get that done. So you're definitely, well, I guess you may not, but I'm definitely putting on gloves for this, as it's really kind of the messy way to do it. You can get these little things that are like bearing packers or whatever. They work good. They work fine. I'm just not really a fan of them. This is how I always did it before I even knew those things existed, and so it's just how I'm used to. So you're more than welcome. Use a bearing packer. This is how I'm going to do it, right? So you're just going to get a big old glob with one hand, put it in the palm of your other, right? And now you can grab your bearing, and you're going to kind of work that in there. So you'll spin around, kind of work it in. That's going to pack it down in there. I would say bearing, whatever, the grease, the bearing, grease packer deal, like, because it's whatever, suctioned and you're using a whatever, you might get it a little bit more packed in there. But this gets plenty. Never had a problem where I felt like I needed more. So just keep working our way around. We've got a lot in there. I like to spin this around here. As you can see, even if you packed it better, like, it's going to push a lot out. But by kind of spinning around and double checking, I'm going to find some spots that maybe didn't get enough and get some of this excess grease back to your palm. I'm happy with that, so we're going to just go ahead and throw that down in there. And as you can see, that is why I wear gloves. It's even difficult taking them off without getting too messy. All right, so got our kingpin, our shims, our tether, our nut, and our tether post, I guess. So just like last time, there we go. Push it all the way in. As you can see, no real wobble, but plenty of free enough back and forth. So the next step is, again, going to be our steering arm. And a couple of extras here, caveats. So as you can see, because you have a rotor, you've got like a flat countersunk bolt, and that's going to countersink into your brake caliper mount. So yeah, these are Smith titanium as well, but these take like a star bit, and that's because they're way less likely to strip than a Allen. So Stevie's used to be, I even have some that were Stevie's that were out like an Allen, and he had troubles with them stripping, so he went with this. And there's actually, I don't know what it is, but I don't know if it's an insert or what, but there's like a harder metal in there. So these are really nice. Your normal everyday ones are going to be an Allen. And whether it's steel or titanium, there's just a good chance that they're going to strip. So before we get too far, we're going to grease these. And then on these, the other thing I like to grease is this countersunk part and the shoulder. And really not much, just enough that that's not what's getting tight when you go to torque this. All right, so you're going to go through your caliper mount first. This is probably off a little bit. All right, so caliper mount first, then through the spindle, right? And then into your steering arm. And as you can see, this steering arm is bigger, or has, two studs here. I run a press-in stud there. You can run a bolt with a nut on the backside. You can also then make bolts. Like, these actually come threaded, and I drill them out in the drill press, and then these press-in studs go in. And instead of having to try and hold something while you take the nut off, you're able to just do this. Just take the nut off, so you don't need two wrenches. That is why I run those, but those are definitely a luxury right? Not everybody has them, nor do they, but they definitely make your life easier, at least for maintenance or quick repairs. More work in the beginning. And those are from Smith as well. And they're actually like broached. I don't know the word, but there's grooves in them, so they're kind of rough, like on this part here. And that way when you press it in, the stud can't spin in the metal. So they're really nice. Stevie definitely thinks of everything when he makes a product. And if this is sounding like a Smith Titanium promotional video, it is not. I'm not on a deal other than they treat me good. They just make the best product. Titanium product for sprint cars and sprint car components out there. So, not a promotional video. If you ever look at my car, I don't have Smith Titanium decals. I just really like their stuff. So we can snug these up now. Once again, turn this on. 45. I'm sure if you ask 10 people, you'd get 10 different numbers. This works for me. I've never had a failure on these, so. All right, so we've got our hub down here. We've got our two locking pieces, and we've got our hub cap. So we can, again, we're going to hold these. One thing, I don't grease them just because as you put it on, it's going to put some grease in there. I would put a little bit of grease on these threads. Again, anything that you're going to tighten down, I think you want some grease on your threads so that you don't get any sort of like false tighten. Really, it was just a burr. So just a preference of mine. All right, so we're tight there. We'll take our little bolts out. I'm going to move you guys back. Righto, so there's that. Now we can put our hubcap on. Again, milled off the face. Sorry, DMI. Hub is on. Next thing we're going to put on is our tie rod. That's going to tie our left front to our right front. And the reason we're going to do that next is because otherwise these things are just flopping around all over the place. This, like the panhard bar, does not matter directionally as far as I know. But I like to just make it match my panhard. And that way, like, my left hand nuts, our left hand heims, are all on the same side of the car, which is just going to allow me to adjust something or check it quicker. So this panhard does need to be a certain length. I know this one's going to be right or very, very close. But this is how you're going to set your toe in, toe out. Really not your toe in. You're going to have toe out. But I'm not going to do that until I've got tires or wheels on it. So you can go hub to hub. But if you do that, you're going to end up with, you're going to want a smaller number because, you know, a 16th from like where the hub is might end up being 8 once you're all the way out where the wheel and tire are at. So I know my number off where I go to the wheel. And I know my number on that. I could just do that and then measure where it's at hub to hub, but I don't. They do make toe plates. I thought I used to have a set, but I haven't been able to find them in a while, and they may not have been mine. I may have borrowed them, but they have some toe plates that mount on to your hub, and then they extend out, and that way you can get that measurement, like where your tire would be, you know, and they're specifically made for the sprint cars. So I know a lot of companies make them. FSR makes them, who's actually a radiator company, but they make a handful of other parts, and they're super good guys. So if you're looking at getting a set of toe plates, I would call them. So now we've got that on. We can go ahead and get our caliper going here. So you've got 2 bolts. And again, I just spun them in there a little bit, hold them, make sure they're not bouncing around all over the shop. Again, we're going to use some blue Loctite here. So this is easier, kind of like your rear or your inboard caliper. If you haven't already bled the brakes, you're not going to have to try and force this down like I am. But we did already bleed the brakes. So little dab there. Not that anyone cares, but I've got one set of snap-on wrenches that are like ratchet wrenches, and I had one set, and I got used to, like, if this was pointing, down, that's tight, right? Well, it was actually like this, but then I had like 2 or 3 of them break, and I took them to the Snap-on guy and got them replaced, and Snap-on changed it, and so now I never know which direction to face the wrench, and it pisses me off. So I don't torque these. It wouldn't hurt to. You definitely can. I just don't. Haven't needed to. A little bit of Loctite, get them as tight as I can, and they're good to go. So make sure you guys can see here. We're going to go ahead, hook up our quick disconnect, brake, boom. So depending on what kind of left front you run, I run a Willwood, and I've actually talked to Stevie about it. So the main reason is this rotor, as you can see, it's got like these pins. So this is a floating rotor. And the standard Willwood set, which a lot of guys run, and Stevie's aren't like this. It's actually all one piece. There's not like this second, like hub for the rotor. So the rotor and the tabs are all one piece. And it's not a floating style. And I just do not like them. I think it makes my brakes spongy, or, like it'll start to push the pucks out. I'm just not a fan. So that's why I run this up here. But Stevie does make a left front one that is really nice and on a lot of the really good fast cards. So as you can see right here in this little area is where that bolt went for the caliper mount and your steering arm, and that is why it's a countersunk. You do not have room for the head of a bolt there. So that's why those are that way. Next thing is going to be our kingpin to kingpin tethers and our tether clamps, which are going to help hold the kingpin to kingpin, and then also our frame to axle tether will go in here as well. There's several styles of these, a lot of different pins that guys run. These are the pins I run. They're easy to take in and out, I think, but everyone has their own preference on those. So the first thing I'm going to show you guys Maxim does, I was kind of talking about one of those, bent washers, and that's what they've done, and that's so that there's not a droop here. You can put a little zip tie there to hold that up. If you don't have that, you can always throw tape, or you can just let it droop. It really doesn't make a difference either way, but I do like that option. So we're going to feed this through. It's going to go over your left front radius rod and in between your other two. And then show you guys on this side. All right, so on our nut here that holds the kingpin, you've got a second nut. And you're going to slide that on like so. The other thing Stevie's done a good job of is his head is extra tall on the first nut part. And I've had, several other brands that don't do that. And so what's nice about that is instead of trying to hold the top of your kingpin, right, you can Just barely. Once it's tight, it's hard to get back out. But you can just get your 7/8 wrench in here. And snug that up. Like I said, it takes just, well, maybe I spoke too soon, Stevie. What the hell, dude? There we go. So others don't even have room to kind of almost do that. So definitely not giving Stevie shit. It's better than a lot of the ones I've had. But, you know, maybe another 8, Stevie, if you watch this, which I'm not really sure that you would or whatever, but maybe another 1/8 inch there. Or I guess I could buy a different wrench, but Stevie makes bolts for these too, of course. I don't have them. I just run the ones that come in it. So that's going to be a 1/4 inch Allen and a 3/8 wrench. And actually, with this style, I've got 2 styles, but this style, I'm going to need a socket. There we go. So you can see this groove here. That's actually for your tether to go through. So these are going to clamp that kingpin to kingpin tether. And then your one from the frame to the axle will come on to here. Try not to lose that. So this is going to go kind of in between your panhard and your left front radius rod. You don't want to get too close to your radius rod and inhibit you in any way. That's definitely a bigger deal if you don't have the weld-on nuts on the axle, kind of like I showed you guys. Just because then you have to be able to get a wrench in there, whereas I don't have to get a wrench in there. It's stopping me here. I'll just tight. Back this top one off a bit. So tethers, when they're new or you're pinching kind of in a different spot, they're a little bit fat. So that's kind of what's stopping me from getting all the way closed here. That's probably off a bit. I'm not a big fan of this brand. Like, that's kind of a bigger pain in the ass than it should be, just because of how that falls. So I'm going to go back to the wrench. Unfortunately, we can't use the ratchet end. I'm going to back this back off a bit because it's not really timed angle-wise how I would like it. Well, there's one. Probably took longer than it needed to. Hopefully this side goes a little bit smoother. I will say these are usually something I kind of put on first, but you could end up where like your lengths are wrong and then it's sandwiched down and you have to loosen them. So it doesn't always work out doing them first. I know the other brand I have is Butler Builds, and I don't have this problem with them. I wish I could warn you of what this brand is, but I don't even know. It's not imprinted on there. anywhere. I don't know if that's normally a good sign. Those are on. Last step for that. As you can see, there's not a lot of slack on that tether there, but we're going to put a zip tie there anyways. So we're going to walk over here to the mule. I left the door open, I'm sure. Oh, no, I closed it. Handy dandy little zip tie deal. And then I'm going to grab these bad boys. And I already know what people are thinking, and no, I'm not just going to cut them before everyone's pissed off and telling me how I'm going to cut my hand on a zip tie. Just calm down for a minute, and maybe I'll learn you something. I'm not saying flush cuts are wrong by any means. They're handy. But the last thing I really care to have is another freaking tool. So don't snip like this. You're going to grab and twist just to show you how good it is, right? Looky there. I promise I scraped it. Didn't cut my wrist. So there's our tethers on that deal. Let's get our tethers wrapped around here and there on that side. And our front end will mostly be complete. We've actually got two other things that we're going to add as well. Another really a tether deal, and then a couple things. So here's what it looks like. This end, you've got this rubber piece. That's where your pin is going to go through. This deal, you've got more rope. And the reason you do, this is not, it's a really tight fit. I guess it's meant to be because they're all this way. Either they need to be, or whoever designed these things is just an asshole. So there is another style. I don't like them, but it wraps around your axle beam like this instead of, like the clamp. It wraps around your axle beam like this, and then you actually run a longer bolt, and like this goes through there, but it's got a metal clamp or whatever. So teach their own. I'm not a fan of those or working on them, so this is the style I use. So there you go. And then you're usually long here, so I'm not sure which direction I usually go. Yeah, that way. So just a little housekeeping deal, because I don't like looking at the big droop. I kind of wrap it around the radius rod, which isn't going to inhibit anything. Now we've got our pin in. All right, so all good there. Now this side, this one's a little bit trickier. So the left side, I don't run a panel on the bottom, by the motor. But this side, I do. So because you've got all this, I end up cutting my panels out a little bit. But yeah, with this radius rod here, it makes it a little bit tighter quarters. There we go. Booyah.